the system of value in black life was established, how that system was maintained, and how that system has left a legacy for all of us today to deal with. So I'm going to speak in therefore about the systematic development, origins and development of value in black lives. I want to speak therefore about this from the point of view of those persons who have built this system that values black life, and to argue therefore that the Black Lives Matters movement is the most revolutionary movement in the world. I will explain what I mean by that. I do believe in terms of system, it is the most revolutionary movement in the world today. So let us therefore go to the very beginning. It's important to start at the beginning and see how the concept of black life and placing a value on it and the significance of that value was first established. If we go back to the 17th century, when the system of chattel slavery has been established, all forms of oppressions of labor were contending. The enslavement of African labor was one of those systems that was contending for dominance. Other forms of labor were being organized. There is a reason why the chattel enslavement of Africans emerged as the predominant system out of all of the systems that were being practiced. And to understand why this system emerged, we have to look at the economics of the process to show how entrepreneurs created a systemic, highly sophisticated economic model, and the Africans were placed within this model in order to generate wealth and profits. If you understand the market forces that created this and how the accounting process was done, how the financial process was done, you come to a clearer understanding as to why evil was able to prevail in the way that it did. Let us look then at the 17th century, when Africans are being brought into this hemisphere along with other forms of labor. The Europeans realized in the 1640s, 1650s that the only way they could maximize profits out of the production systems being established is to drive labor to the extreme. Therefore, you needed a system that would give you maximum productivity. It would give you greatest value out of your investment. It would give you persistent returns over generations. It would give you a level of return on your investment that would be impossible with any other system of labor. This is how the chattel system was put in place. And first, the English mastered this. They were the ones who had developed the highest level of economic theory. The English were the ones who had perfected the development of finance and banking. And remember, the Spanish were colonizing the whole hemisphere. Look at Spain today, it's one of the poorest countries in the world. And yet they owned the whole place because they did not know how to convert mineral wealth into financial capital. The British knew how to do this. You run the revenues through the banking system, other people borrow the money, and you develop capital. Africans were caught in this system of economic thinking, and this is how the system of chattel slavery was built. First of all, we have to convert the African into a unit of property. This is the first thing you have to do, and you have to measure this in all of the accounting systems. So the Africans were chattelized. They were the only people in this hemisphere, in the world, who were chattelized, converted by law into a unit of property. Property has market values. You all know what you can do with property. You can buy it, you can sell it, you can lend it, you can lease it, you can mortgage it, you can use it as collateral, you can use it as money. African was converted into that system whereby they could be used in this way. This was the first process that started the issue of value in black lives. That is, you could measure it, you could put a market value on it, you could see it's rising and fall in the market. And in much the same way that you open your television in the morning and you see the Dow Jones Index and you see the rise and fall of your bonds and your stocks and your shares, this is the world in which Africans were brought. Every day you look at their market values. Their market values were going up and down, week by week, day by day. That is what is meant by value in black lives from the other side. From the other side. That's how they saw this. This is a culture which has persisted through time. You now have to legalize all of this. You have to make this the basis of a system. It cannot be ad hoc. It cannot be here today and gone tomorrow. It has to be organized into a legal structure that is transportable from one place to another. Legislation was therefore done, and in all of the colonies of this hemisphere, laws were put in place to convert the African into a unit of property. And furthermore, not only the capital, but the capital and its offspring. That is, the enslaved woman gave birth to a child. The child had a market value at birth. At the moment that child was born, it had a market value which was reflected in the accounts. And the accounts of the estate, 25 babies born, market value $100, $5 each. And that value goes from year to year until the child matures. By the time that child reaches 12 or 13, that child now has a market value, the equivalent of the mother. So therefore, the black woman in this system was what you call perfect property. If you buy a vehicle, you buy a car, that car devalues every year. You buy a female, 100 pounds, she gives you 5 children, her children give you a greater value, so the original expenditure in her is recouped within 3 or 4 years, and after that it is what you call pure profits. This is how black life was constructed for 300 years in this part of the world. The first conversation we have around this in the British Parliament is 1659. And I would encourage all of you to go online and to read this first debate in the British Parliament, because I'm going to give you a quotation that tells you exactly what you want to hear. The year is 1659. The British Parliament is concerned that white workers in Virginia, in Barbados, in Jamaica, and elsewhere are being treated like slaves. That white indentured workers, the Irish especially, political prisoners, were being treated like slaves, and this is creating a problem in the British Parliament. 1659, the British Parliament has its first debate on African slavery. And in that debate, the Speaker of the House wrapped up the conversation by saying, we have to end the process of bringing white workers over to the colonies and treating them like slaves. If this process does not end, this is the quotation, our lives will be as cheap as those of the Negroes. That is the first statement in the British Parliament about valuing black lives. Our lives will be as cheap as those of the Negroes. And if you want to read that reference, there is a book called The Diary of Richard Burton. The Parliamentary Diaries of Richard Burton. These diaries, he was a parliamentarian in that period, he was a part of the conversation. And his diaries were published in 1828. So you go on Google, The Diaries of Richard Burton, 1828 edition, and you will see the debate in the British Parliament of 1659. So the system is established. Now the system has to be reproduced. The next phase in the system is when slavery is now being matured. 100 years have gone by, it has matured, it's now a developed system. The next phase is the end of the 18th century, when the slave owners have a choice. And the choice is, to quote, to buy or to breed. Do we bring more Africans from Africa? Do we buy more Africans from Africa? Or do we breed African labor domestically? And every slave owner has a choice to make. Do I buy from Africa? Do I breed domestically? And in that calculation, they did all of the accounting. An African slave is going to cost us $80, $100 from Senegal, from Gambia, from Cameroon. But if we can adjust the food supply on the plantation, we can encourage the women to have babies in the value. So all of that is set out in accounts. It is all there in the accounting documents of the estates and the ledgers and the annual reports, because slave owners had to pay taxes on their property. They paid taxes on their slaves. Slaves are property. They had to pay taxes. And all of this is set out in the documentation. And for 50 years, every slave owner in this hemisphere had to choose to buy or to breed. And to make that decision, he or her had to go through the calculation of cost, of revenue, all of the cost benefits analysis that we do today in business. All the accounting procedures we do today in business, that slave owner had to do it to make a rational choice. And in that process, the African, again, is described as property, chattel, real estate. Black lives can be measured in market value. The third phase in this comes to the emancipation moment. In the 19th century, emancipation is going through the Caribbean. It's going through North America, Brazil, all the way through the 19th century. We have 7 different models of emancipation. From the Haitian model, the US model, the English, French, Dutch, Caribbean model, the Brazil model, every part of this hemisphere is passing emancipation legislation. But in that legislation, in all of those models, compensation to the slave owner is a critical part of the law. But the only way you can compensate the slave owner is, first of all, to recognize that the African is property. Because you are paying property compensation. The government is taking away the private property of individuals and freeing that property. Therefore, the government has to compensate you for taking your property and liberating that property. Wow. And therefore, in the emancipation laws of the US, of the English colonies, the French colonies, the Dutch colonies, the governments, first of all, had to agree and determine that black people were property. Otherwise, the legislature could not direct the treasurer to pay the compensation money. First of all, you have to establish that it is property compensation. That becomes the fundamental contradiction of every Emancipation Act, that all of those laws, first of all, the governments deem black people as property. And then, having deemed them as property, compensated those who own us for the loss of their property. This value system has persisted into the contemporary societies today, where there is a system of looking at black labor. There is a system of looking at black people as so many units of labor. You are not citizens, you're not human beings, you are so many units of labor. And that is how the system sees the black community of the world today. If you understand the systemic process, then you are in a better position to begin to dismantle it. Which is why I say that the Black Lives Matter movement is the most revolutionary movement in the world, because that movement seeks to turn upside down a system of economic thinking that has been in place for 400 years. And this is why all of us must support it. This is the moment where we say, turn this ship around and go in the other direction. Black Lives Matter to us. Black Lives Matter to us. Not only to those who are using our labor and have enriched historically out of our labor, it matters to us. And therefore, this is the beginning of the most, it is the most revolutionary movement, because it turned this 300-year history around. I thank you. Yeah.